Take the long way around.
I have no idea what I'm doing.
Hello everyone and welcome to my healing series in which I analyze the capabilities of each healing job and explain how best to use them. This video will cover the Scholar as of patch 4.3. In this guide, you'll be learning about the basic fundamentals of healing, the healing mentality, along with effective mana management, efficient use of your skills, correct use of your unique Scholar toolkit, and much more. This guide is intended for players of all experience levels, from veterans to fresh sprouts. Please keep in mind that this is my personal opinion of how the class should be played, but remember that good players are open-minded to new and different forms of thinking to better add to their own healing style. This guide is full of general tips and tricks that can be applied to almost any MMO out there, and you'll find success in healing like I have in the past. Table of Contents. Section 1. Vocab. Section 2. Healing Mentality. Section 3. Healing Fundamentals. Section 4. Mana Management and Conservation. Section 5. Optimal cooldown usage. Section 6. Managing your pet. Section 7. The do's and don'ts of healing. Section 8. Aetherflow Management. Section 9. Stat Priority. Section 10. Recommended role skills. Section 11. Compatibility and synergy with the other healer. Section 12. Knowing the enemy. Section 13. Your mana bar and raising. Section 14. Good DPS habits. Section 15. Tanks, a subsection. Section 16. Taking your healing to the next level. In my personal opinion, healers are the hardest to play, but the most rewarding. You have control over the group's success. It sounds like a lot of pressure, and it certainly is, but it's nice to have control over the situation and your own health bar for that matter. Healing isn't as brainless as some DPS jobs, or as checklist oriented as tanking is. It's unique and special in its own way. It requires you to analyze the situation and react accordingly, make snap judgments or calculations, anticipate incoming damage, assess and conserve your resources, and support other party members. Before we start, I'd like to quickly define and explain some vocabulary that will be mentioned in this guide that even seasoned healers may not be familiar with. Some of these terms are from other MMOs, some of them are from other game genres, and others I've coined myself, but they can still be applied in some manner to FF14. Value refers to utilizing the most effect out of your spell to its fullest capacity for a minimal amount of mana, time, or other resource. Mana efficiency refers to whether or not the amount of mana spent on a spell is proportionate to its effect. For example, a Cure 1 is more mana efficient than Cure 2 in some instances because it's less likely to overheal. Utility spells are spells that are useful in a particular niche situation. Isuna and Deployment Tactics are both utility spells. Clutch healing refers to saving somebody's life before otherwise fatal damage hits. Mana economy is the careful and systematic utilization and preservation of mana resources. Spot healing means to heal individual targets that have taken more damage than others. Niche, in this context, is the unique role a healer, or any other job for that matter, fulfills in a raid. For example, a white mage is unable to replicate the niche of a scholar because its capacity for damage and absorption is inferior. Group stability refers to whether or not the group can function optimally. Stage control refers to the amount of available space to stand in without fear of being hit by avoidable damage. A tank can manipulate the amount of control over the stage a party has by identifying dangerous mechanics or AoEs and positioning accordingly. Slide casting is a term that will be covered more in depth during section 12. It refers to the ability to cast a spell and move immediately afterwards, finishing the cast and covering some distance simultaneously. Slide casting is incredibly important and makes up a large portion of your on-the-move healing options. This portion of the guide will cover the mentality a healer should have before walking into a dungeon or raid. The healing mentality for all healers is essentially the same, so if you've seen my Astrologian guide, you may find the wording similar, but some points are unique to the scholar. First of all, what is your role as a healer? What am I supposed to be doing? Your job and first priority is to fill health bars. You do everything in your power to keep other members of your party alive. Even if everyone in your party stands in fire or somebody gets hit by an AoE and dies instantly, there's probably a way you could have prevented it. Healers have a lot of power and influence over the outcome of a fight, especially in Final Fantasy XIV. A well-placed benediction or a size can mean the difference between life or death. What is healing? Well, there are certainly a lot of opinions about what healing is and what your job actually entails. I define healing as being responsible for the well-being of the group. It's to support or back up your group when they make mistakes. No matter how solid or how good your group composition is, someone will make a mistake, and it's your job to fix that. You need to know what your role as a healer really is. If you look over all your spells and abilities, you'll see a lot of things that don't necessarily benefit you directly, unlike a tank or DPS class. Your job is to help others and maintain group stability. What is healing not? Healing, first of all, is not easy. It's full of stressful situations, and it's easy to be overwhelmed when you see health bars rapidly falling. If you're doing your job right, then you should have something to do at all times. It's a constant micromanagement and even a battle with your mana bar and cooldowns. Healing is also not competitive. There's no point in trying to compete with your fellow healers. For example, take a white mage and an astrologian. White mage is just naturally geared to do more healing. It's geared to have more throughput, whereas astrologian is more suited as a supportive healer with a mobile playstyle. With that being said, why should you heal in the first place? First off, you're the backbone of the group. You have power and influence, even more so than the tank does. The tank is usually the one to be in charge of a group, but you have the ultimate ability to decide who lives and who dies. A DPS class, for example, doesn't have that kind of power. A bad tank can be made up by a good healer. Bad DPS will require more healing and a more aggressive healer to make the cut, but a bad healer can't be corrected or remedied by any other job. It falls upon you to do your job optimally. Control is power, and you can rely on yourself to make good calls if you know what's going on. Last point, healing is eternally engaging. There's always something going on, something to pay attention to, always something to prepare for. There's never a moment of monotony like there is sometimes with DPS. Your mind will always be racing, adrenaline always pumping. Now for healing philosophy inside the game itself. Healing operates, for the most part, on a priority system. Tanks are on top. Keeping the tanks alive is key to the entire group's survival. Then you. As the healer, you have the supreme power to decide who lives and who dies, and you lose that power if you're dead yourself. Next are the DPS, and because each healer should be following this list of priorities, the co-healer is last on the list. Why? Because they should be healing themselves if they're following the priority system correctly. Obviously, there are exceptions to this system, and that's where a healer's judgment comes in. It's up to you to decide who will be alive by the end of the fight. It's left up to the healer to triage your party, assigning levels of urgency to each damaged party member. Even though DPS are at the bottom of the priority list, they shouldn't be left to the wayside in favor of getting that last stone 4 out. Your responsibility, first and foremost, is to ensure the group continues functioning at maximum capacity, which means that your DPS buddies should matter. Secondly, after healing, you should be making a conscious effort to support the group in any way possible. Whether that be DPSing, throwing out absorbs and buffs to prepare for the next big hit, supporting your co-healer and helping them preserve mana, or handling mechanics that temporarily prevent a DPS from doing damage. A Scholar is specifically entitled an Absorb Healer, meaning that you take the weight off other healers by providing absorbs and other forms of damage mitigation. After this task is complete, you can output DPS in periods of low damage. However, due to the mana cost increases to both Sukkar and Adloquium, Scholars have to learn to DPS within moderation. Our mana economy is objectively inferior to that of both Astrologian and White Mage, and the Scholar community needs to learn to prioritize healing over damage output. Third, as a healer, and as a Scholar especially, you need to understand what the encounter is asking of you and react accordingly. What the boss does is primarily what determines what we do and how we play. How is the encounter designed? Does the boss throw out a massive AoE that's larger than your raid's total health pool? Then the encounter is asking you to mitigate and reduce damage. Is there a very short enrage timer? Then the encounter is asking you to prioritize DPS uptime, sometimes over mana efficiency. Asking yourself what Square Enix expects healers to do in a fight helps to optimize your healing and decision making. As a Scholar, you are not a White Mage or Astrologian. I'll give you a couple seconds to let that sink in. This is an obvious, kind of weird statement to make, but I'll elaborate. A White Mage's job is to heal large amounts of burst damage. An Astrologian's job is to heal and enhance the performance of the group. Scholar is unique in the sense that its base class is actually a DPS role, which I believe is an important component of the job as a whole. That being said, your job as a Scholar is to heal the group and lessen the burdens off the other healer through absorption and abuse of fairy healing, DPSing when possible. Scholar is the king of off-the-global cooldown healing and on-demand mitigation. But how do you heal? Honestly, there is no answer to this question. Healing is entirely situational, and you have a set amount of healing spells that you have to use to patch up the health bars. If you can't match a spell with the damage, there will either be deaths or wasted mana. But as a Scholar, you have so many resources you can use to fill a health bar. Scholars are very versatile and a valuable addition to any raid group. Remember that healing is done on a case-by-case basis, and each experience will never be the same as the next. Being a healer requires flexibility, insight, and personal judgment. Keep an open mind and a watchful eye on the entire situation, process what's going on, and get a grasp on what the group's status is and where it could lead. Healing is entirely situational, and you have a set amount of healing spells that you have to use to patch up the health bars. You have to match the cure potency of the spell to the health missing. If you can't match a spell or cooldown with the damage, everyone dies or you'll end up wasting mana, like I said before. One of those is obviously worse than the other. Eventually though, you'll learn how much health a particular spell fills just based on the cure potency alone. You need to consider all the factors before making a decision. Potency, usability, cast time, cooldown, etc. Determining what ability to use also ultimately comes down to a few more factors. How fast do people need healing? How many people need healing? How much healing do my allies need? How much mana do I have left? Can I heal without worrying about whether or not I'll be hit by an AoE or some form of avoidable damage? Points 1 and 4 are particularly important for high-level play as a Scholar. Sometimes, even with the raid at half health, nobody is in immediate danger. Allowing healing over time from Whispering Dawn or Medica 2, or deploying an Adloquium is all that's needed to survive a mechanic, allowing ample time to be productive in other aspects. As the healer, and even more so a Scholar, you are uniquely more aware of the group situation, more so than anyone else. DPS and tanks aren't aware of whether or not their healer has Indomitability off cooldown. They're not aware of who will be chosen when it comes down to healing one of two dying targets. They're sometimes not even aware of whether or not a certain mechanic will kill them. As a healer, you have a unique perspective of the raid's status, and this data can be used to make an educated decision about what you can be doing. Because of the low healing potency of VIII and the high mana cost of Succor and Adloquium, you have to be a proactive healer. Anticipating damage, preparing and reacting accordingly will save you extra mana that a scholar would desperately need. Another thing a healer should be concerned with is aggro generation. When a tank first pulls, you should be mindful of how much enmity your spells like Physic, Embrace, or the Fairy Tether are creating. Immediately drawing attention to yourself or your fairy at the start of a pull could spell disaster for group stability. You could end up getting killed or panicking and wasting mana or other resources. Because Scholar doesn't have regions, enmity isn't as much of a concern as it is to white mages or astrologians, but you should still be mindful of it. If you've seen my astrologian healing guide, then you'll already know where I stand when it comes to DPSing as a healer. My stance really hasn't changed since then. To summarize, healer DPS is auxiliary and should only be appreciated and valued. If you aren't comfortable with your mana management or the mechanics of a fight, you shouldn't feel compelled to do damage. However, and that's a big however, you need to be doing something productive every second of every fight. Furthermore, Scholar is unique among the three healers. DPS is a huge part of the way the class works. If you don't want a DPS, that's okay, but realize that one of the other two healers might be more suited for a playstyle that lacks DPS. Pre-casting means to start casting a healing spell when you suspect or know damage is coming. When done correctly, you should be able to identify a boss's telegraphed attack and begin casting a healing spell before the damage hits. Your spell should land immediately after everyone takes damage. Pre-casting really shows how much of the fight you know, and it's the mark of a good healer. Don't think that just because Scholar has instant cast heals that pre-casting isn't important. In fact, it's more important to pre-cast as a Scholar to preemptively mitigate damage. With the exception of Whispering Dawn and Aether Pact, you have no healing over time. This means you'll be tending to damage party members more frequently than a white mage or astrologian would, making pre-casting one of the most important skills to learn if you're going to want to be a Scholar. Mana management is one of the single most important aspects of healing. You can spam your most powerful heal if you want to, but everyone will die if you run out of resources and are unable to cast for the remainder of the pull. You need to be aware of how much your spells cost and what an impact your spells will have on the target's health bar, and your remaining mana. The concept is easy. Ask yourself these questions every time you cast a spell. Am I getting the optimal amount of healing from using this spell while spending the least amount of mana? Can my mana bar take much more of this before I run out of resources? If the answer is no to either of these questions, you are being mana inefficient. Mana management is generally quite easy. It's really just a game of keeping your mana restoring cooldowns on, well, cooldown. But I see so many healers casting a Cure 2 when the target is missing 10% of their health, and then complain that they're out of mana near the end of the fight. Ask yourself whether the cure potency of the spell you're casting matches the damage taken. Overhealing is kind of a rampant issue in this healing community. If you look at the average overhealing of a white mage on FF logs, it's like 40%. That's not sustainable. As a healer in general, it is imperative that you manage and conserve your mana properly. With no mana, there is no healing, and with no healing, there will be deaths. The most common cause of this is overhealing, or healing over the amount of health the target is missing. For example, Using Adloquium constantly without utilizing the full extent of the absorb, instead of defaulting to Physic, Lustrate, or Embrace healing from Eos and Selene. Physic is your bare bones heal, similar to Cure 1 and Benefict 1. The other healing spells, frankly, should not be cast unless the situation calls for it, even despite Scholar's lack of healing efficiency with Physic when compared to the other two healers. Succor and Adloquium cost too much mana to be casted on a whim. Both require proper planning, preparation, and insight before they should be used. If the proper conditions for these spells are not met, making them more mana efficient than Physic, or the Embrace healing from your fairy simply isn't enough to counteract the incoming damage, using them is not justified. Both of these spells cost considerably more mana than Physic, and improper or frequent use of them will result in going very, very quickly. Playing Scholar has really taught me that White Mage and Astrologian have the resources to use and abuse AoE healing constantly, while Scholars don't necessarily have the same luxury. In order to perform at your best, you have to analyze the situation, plan and prepare properly, and squeeze the most value out of your absorbs and utility spells. Without this mindset, Scholar simply isn't viable enough to be used for high-end content over the raw burst healing and damage White Mage possesses, or the unique utility and support Astrologian provides. The proactive and preventative nature of the way Scholar plays is what sets it apart from the other two healers. When you eventually do go mana negative, pop some sort of mana saving or restoring cooldown. Obviously, Aetherflow and Lucid Dreaming restore mana, but Scholar has access to other tools that prevent or reduce damage, or heal at no cost, which helps conserve their remaining mana. Namely, spells that generate value for free, like Deployment Tactics or your Aetherflow abilities. Much of Scholar's mana recovery lies in careful management of its 3 mana restoring abilities, being Aetherflow, Lucid Dreaming, and Energy Drain. Aetherflow should always be on cooldown, period. It restores 10% mana, offers loads of free value-generating healing spells, and the excess stacks can be used on Energy Drain for free mana and health. Lucid Dreaming is more of a fallback option when Aetherflow/Energy Drain is eventually not enough mana to sustain the amount that you're spending. In order to understand how mana works, it's also important to understand the difference between mana positive, mana neutral, mana negative, and how it ties into mana efficiency as a whole. Something that is mana positive directly restores mana, such as Lucid Dreaming, Aetherflow, or Energy Drain. Something that is mana neutral is a spell that consumes mana that is then restored during or after the cast. Physic, for example, doesn't cost much MP, meaning that its cost can be refunded by passive mana regen. Something that is mana negative is an action that consumes more mana than passive regen can restore it, like Adloquium or Succor. This sort of scale is separate from efficiency. Succor can be mana negative but also mana efficient if the situation calls for Succor to be used. Now we're going to start getting into the nitty-gritty, the way Scholar works specifically. This section will be covering cooldowns a Scholar has access to that aren't tied to your Aetherflow mechanic or roll skills. This narrows our cooldowns down to about 5 different abilities. Chain Stratagem increases critical hit rate on the target by 15%. You should basically be using this on cooldown. Aether Pack tethers your fairy to the target, providing a heal over time of 480 potency for however much your fairy gauge is filled. I think, ignoring the obvious design issues with your fairy losing the tether and still consuming the fairy gauge, this is one of the best pieces of healing utility the Scholar got this expansion. Don't ever allow your gauge to stay completely full for fear of wasting resources after using Aetherflow abilities. Dissipation kills your fairy, providing 3 Aetherflow stacks and increasing healing magic potency by 20% for 30 seconds. Keep in mind the potency increase doesn't affect abilities like Lustrate or Indomitability, and only improves the potency of spells. Unfortunately, this skill sees little use because it's basically a worse largesse with a longer cooldown, and disables the use of your fairy. It can be used in very niche situations in which someone is dying and you need Lustrate right now, or the whole party is dying and you need a combination of Indomitability and Sucker Spam to save them. But besides that, the disadvantage of losing your fairy is too great to justify using this skill outside of those fringe situations. Deployment Tactics spreads your Adloquium and Eye for an Eye buffs to everyone in a small radius. It's great if you're preparing for an ultimate attack or know exactly when AoE damage is coming. Use it early and often to save mana and relieve pressure off the other healer. It's easily one of the best pieces of utility that Scholar has access to. Emergency Tactics converts your absorption barriers into pure healing, effectively doubling the potency of Sucker and Adloquium. Use this frequently. It's on a low cooldown, it doesn't cost anything, and is perfect for burst healing. You should fall back on it when you're saving Indomitability for some other mechanic. The rule of thumb for cooldown usage is to use them often and early. Scholar is unique in the sense that it has access to special utility in the form of your fairy that the other healers simply don't have. But in order to capitalize on this tactical advantage, you need to know how to properly manage what your pet is doing, on top of the other things you keep an eye on as a healer. Out of the 3 healing jobs, Scholar really has the most to pay attention to in order to do their job correctly. The access we have to our pets effectively gives us a second healing toolkit, and adds a level of complexity to healing that our Astrologian and White Mage counterparts simply don't have access to. First order of business, your pet needs to be on either obey or passive at all times. Sick is not allowed, never ever. Second, don't forget to utilize the other abilities your pet can cast besides Embrace and Whispering Dawn. In regards to AO specifically, Fey Covenant can help to reduce incoming damage in certain situations, and Fey Illumination can drastically reduce the amount of healing required to recover from an AoE when used in tandem with Largesse. Third, you need to macro Embrace with Physic, especially if you keep your pet on passive. The Physic will heal for more at the cost of no mana, and this means your fairy will use the spell even while the target is above 80% health, as seen in this clip. Let's take a look at some fairy healing macros that you'll definitely want to create before walking into any Stormblood content. Because Selene is more quality of life oriented as opposed to Eos's focus on healing, she really doesn't require as much micromanagement. Finally, we'll take a look at which fairy to use in certain situations. Eos is honestly the more preferred and useful fairy of the two. With the Stormblood changes, Scholar has trouble healing high amounts of damage, and Eos offers to make up for that disability with her healing-centered utility. Whispering Dawn is Scholar's only heal over time, with the exception of Aether Pack. This skill is absolutely invaluable. Fey Covenant helps to alleviate damage taken during AoE phases and ultimate attacks, saving mana. Fey Illumination provides a little healing increase, and as said before, is great when used alongside Largesse. Selene provides some quality of life improvements in the form of an AoE Purify, a Silence, and a Haste increase. Her Silence will probably never find a use in high-end rating. The AoE Purify, while a nice convenience, doesn't really compare to any of Eos's abilities. The 3% increase Selene offers in the form of Feywind is nice, but it won't really help you fill health bars. Selene is obviously the better fairy for leveling, but her quality of life improvements are no match for Eos and her superior healing throughput. This section is dedicated to a couple quick facts that all healers should be mindful of when they start their journey. It's more dedicated towards newer players, so if you're a more experienced healer, you might consider skipping this section. Do remember to stay in range of all of your targets. You'll feel really stupid if you could have saved somebody, but you were too far away from where they died. Rescue can help alleviate this situation, so ensure that the entire party is in range of it at all times. Do remember to dodge AoEs, of course. Do attempt to DPS in between damage spikes or healing spells. It's understandable if you're reluctant about DPSing for whatever reason, but it just makes you a better healer, period. If you ever want to see high-end content like Savage or the Ultimate fights, you're gonna have to learn how to do it. It's just the way the game is designed. Do learn how to precast a heal immediately before a casted AoE spell from a boss. Do at least make an effort to learn and understand other jobs, especially how the other two healers work. This helps you to understand what classes may be susceptible to what mechanics, and learning the other healers helps you to understand what cooldowns and healing spells they may have access to. This helps with developing effective mitigation and synergistic habits. Do get to know your group members, especially the tank. In 4-man dungeons, having a general idea of how much the tank will pull and how long they can sustain themselves without healing can prevent an unnecessary death. Do macro Shadow Flare to be placed at the target's position. Use this macro that will appear on the screen shortly. Also, a couple things that you shouldn't do. Don't feel overwhelmed by a bunch of raid damage. Use cooldowns and don't be worried about the healing meters. The only thing that matters is whether or not the party is still functional. Abuse the healing potencies and short cooldowns of Lustrate, Indomitability, and Emergency Tactics. Don't get wrapped up in healing meters. There's no way to measure how much you've supported the group's success with a meter that tracks how much HP you've restored. Don't overheal. Overheal is just what it sounds like, healing for more HP than the missing HP of a party member. I cannot stress this enough. Doing this over and over again in a fight will result in a lot of extra enmity, wasted MP, and lost value. Healing over time is usually not a problem as they heal over a long period of time and are generally very mana efficient and generate a lot of value for their MP costs. Casting larger spells though, like Cure 2 or Adloquium, to heal small portions of damage is very taxing on a healer's mana bar. Don't be scared of HP bars that aren't full. Your job as a healer is not to fill health bars, but to keep people alive and make sure nobody is hindered by detrimental effects. That's it. Regardless of whether or not a party member is at 100% health or at 50% health, they're still able to do their job. As you become more adept in healing, you can be more and more flexible on how much health your allies drop down to before you heal them. A skilled healer can DPS, heal, and prepare for more damage all at once. But there are limits, and you need to be mindful that you're a healer, and it's your responsibility to take care of the group. Don't let people pressure you into becoming a DPS obsessive healer, especially as a scholar. Some people aren't aware that our damage and healing capabilities have been severely limited as of patch 4.0, and the other two healers can do more damage than us at the cost of less. Furthermore, there seems to be a toxic mentality about Scholar being a quote-unquote off healer, an idea that refuses to die. There is no off healer role. As you already know, Aetherflow provides 3 stacks and sits on a 60-second cooldown. The goal is to ration your stacks until you can refill them without wasting any valuable cooldown time. If we do the math, 60 seconds divided by 3 Aetherflow stacks equals 20 seconds, meaning that you should be using an Aetherflow ability roughly every 20 seconds, even if it's energy drain. The level 68 trait, Quicken Aetherflow, reduces the cooldown by 5 seconds every time you use an Aetherflow ability, but you should still maintain the 20-second interval between Aetherflow spells despite the reduction. Now we'll take a look at each Aetherflow ability, explaining its usage and priority. Indomitability is an instant free AoE heal with a potency of 400 that heals for double of that of Sucker. This is perfect for burst healing and mana conservation, and is of highest priority. It's an important cooldown and shouldn't be used lightly. It remains Scholar's strongest AoE heal, and it should only be treated as such. Lustrate heals the target for 600 potency. This is perfect for on-the-move single-target healing, burst healing, or mana conservation. Using this spell over emergency tactics plus Adloquium saves 1,800 mana and the cooldown for tactics, also high priority. Excogitation heals the target for 800 potency when they fall below 50% health. I like to use this for telegraphed attacks, like highest stakes in Byakko EX. It's hard-hitting, predictable damage. Besides that, I use it for large tank busters, or if the target is below 50% already, I cast it over Lustrate for the additional 200 potency. Sacred Soil reduces damage by 10% for everyone who stands inside, and it has a 20% chance to make your next Sucker cost no mana. While this significantly reduces the amount of damage going out on larger or telegraphed AoE attacks, this ability is still relatively low priority. The stack would better be spent on Lustrate or Indomitability. Energy Drain deals damage with a potency of 150 and absorbs some health and mana, about 1,000 each. Use this spell when Aetherflow is coming off cooldown and you still have stacks that you can't find a use for. Otherwise, this is the last priority. Bane spreads your damage over time effects to everything in range that decreases in potency for every enemy. This doesn't find much use in Savage Raids or Extreme Primals unless it's during like an ad phase or something, but it's one of your only sources of AoE damage, so it's imperative for dungeons. Indomitability is greater than Lustrate, which equals Excogitation, which is greater than Sacred Soil, which equals Bane, which equals Energy Drain. Let me just say this before I start. I'm really not a math expert whatsoever, and if you really want to know the most effective stat choice, you're better off checking Reddit for the min-maxers who actually know what they're doing when it comes to stat weights and the calculations behind it. That being said, the ideal build for my playstyle looks something like this. This is what I've come up with after a bit of research as well as my own personal opinion on the matter. Critical Hit, while it's a good stat, is one of my least favorite across MMOs. Having too much crit can create a bad habit of relying on critical heals instead of matching your spell's potency to the damage. If I see a moderately damaged target, I'll cast a larger heal instead of a smaller one and pray for a crit. However, this stat is important to have as a scholar due to the massive value a critical Adloquium generates and its synergy with deployment tactics, as well as being a large increase to DPS. It can also assist with your rather inefficient physics spell when you don't have Lustrate available and need a bit more to your spammable heal. I place this on top. Spell speed is just a great stat. This stat gives healers more mobility, it improves reaction times, and it allows you to throw out absorbs as the attack is being cast. It's really valuable for precasting, and this has been one of my favorite stats across MMOs. Determination is what I'd go with if I weren't melding crit. It provides a pretty sizable increase to all of your stats, period, and spell speed and determination can be switched around. It can be switch swapped. With the changes to the cross-class system, you now have 10 different role abilities to choose from and only 5 slots available. We'll start with the mandatory skills. Lucid Dreaming reduces enmity by half and applies a refresh effect with 80 potency for 21 seconds. This would be your primary means of recovering MP. This is absolutely mandatory, and if not for the MP, take it for the enmity reduction. Swift Cast allows your next spell to be cast instantly on a 60-second cooldown. It's mandatory for the utility it provides in raising, instant summoning, and clutch healing. Largesse increases healing magic potency by 20% for 20 seconds. Keep in mind that this skill doesn't affect abilities like Lustrate or Indomitability. Next, utility spells like Protect and Isuna are not required for every fight. You can apply Protect at the start of any instance and replace it with another ability as you see fit. In Isuna's case, you'll only need it if you know for sure that the fight includes dispellable debuffs. Now that we have 3 of the 5 slots filled, let's take a look at the 5 remaining skills and fill up the last couple slots. Break deals unaspected damage for only 50 potency and applies a heavy debuff. You might use this for leveling, but it'll never see use in any other context whatsoever. Eye for an Eye puts a 20-second barrier on the target that gives each enemy a 20% chance they'll do less damage on hit. I recommend this for general dungeon use, fights with lots of adds, or hard-hitting tank busters. This obviously synergizes very well with deployment tactics. Cleric Stance increases attack magic potency by 5% for 15 seconds. It's underpowered and barely deserves a spot here, a real shadow of its former self, but any DPS is good DPS. I also find that Surecast is becoming increasingly more relevant in new content. It makes your next cast go off without interruption, as well as nullifying most knockback effects. It finds some niche uses for fights like O5S, O7S, or Lakshmi EX during Chunkala. Rescue teleports a party member to your side, saving them from some sort of AoE attack. The usefulness of this skill is incredibly dependent on your knowledge and familiarity with the fight. It's amazing for fights like Royal Menagerie or Tsukiyomi EX, but again, it's mediocre at best unless you know what you're doing. I recommend taking Lucid Dreaming, Swiftcast, Largesse, Eye for an Eye, and you can either keep Protect or you can opt in to Rescue or Surecast. Now, of course, these abilities are never really set in stone. It all really just comes down to what the fight is actually asking of you to bring to the table as a healer. So you need to be mindful of the tools you have access to, and you need to be mindful of the tools that you lose access to because of the choices that you've made. First things first, I want to get this out of the way really quickly. There is no such thing as a main healer off healer. Healers should be working together to maintain the group and maximize DPS uptime between the two of them. There is no off healer, there hasn't been any off healer, and there will never be an off healer. Moving on. As you probably already know, healers don't just heal. They have access to all kinds of utility, such as purifying debuffs, applying beneficial buffs, DPS capabilities, absorption, etc. Now, both healers in the party need to do all of these things at once, while also being mindful of the other's mana pool, health bar, location, and proximity to the rest of the party, available cooldowns, and class niche in the raid. The key to maintaining the delicate equilibrium of this synergy, and thereby the equilibrium of the group, is communication. Honestly, there isn't a way to teach someone how to do this properly. There's no little trick to learn, there's no special technique you can do, there's nothing, there's no loopholes. It all just comes through experience. The gist of it is really just to avoid doing overlapping tasks. If someone takes a massive spike of damage and you both move in order to heal the target, one of you will have wasted both mana and value. If the other healer won't lay up the Purifies and the Isunas, go ahead and let them take care of it while you find something else to do. And because most randoms aren't necessarily focused on cooperation with their partners, adapting to the other healer's style is imperative. There are so many different philosophies and playstyles out there, and learning to work with said playstyles will improve your performance as both a gamer and a healer. Face it, with your limited healing toolkit and restrictive mana bar, you can't do everything by yourself, and that goes for all three healers. It feels terrible to lose a bit of control, but you operate as one part in a two-man team. It's hard to let go, but it saves a lot of mana and heartache in the long run if you just accept it. Remember, as a scholar, you're more of a support healer than anything. Your true strength lies in the unique utility that you have with the fairy, as well as having access to your powerful mitigation tools. Your job is to relieve pressure from the other healer and give them as much breathing room and freedom as possible, if I see a white mage casting Medica 2 after the Reprimand Barrage and Tsukuyomi EX, obviously I want Burn Indomitability to blow up my healing numbers. I'll save it for Lunacy. In that situation, I'd follow up with a Sukkar to top off the raid and soak incoming damage. This section is in reality a series of subsections that deal with the way that boss encounters are designed and how best to respond. Let's take a look at some definitions first. Placement is where you physically situate your character. This obviously fluctuates depending on where the mechanics of the fight require you to stand in order to be the most effective healer. Mobility, however, is the capacity at which you are able to move and heal at the same time. Whether or not you can maintain group stability is irrelevant if you're unable to heal because you're being constantly interrupted by the mechanics of the fight. Placement in a fight is generally either not important or it changes depending on the encounter and what sort of AoEs will be flying around. Rule of thumb is to plop yourself down nearby the other healer, avoid standing next to casting classes like Black Mage or Summoner, and never stand near the tank. That being said, mobility as a healer is very much important, and you have the tools as a scholar to do this very effectively. Lustrate, Indomitability, Excogitation, Swiftcast, Rescue, Bio 2, Shadow Flare, Energy Drain, Aether Pact, Sacred Soil. All of these spells and abilities are things that a scholar can use to influence the amount of damage or healing going out in the fight, maintaining group stability, and more importantly, they're all instant abilities that can be cast on the move. When you're in fights like Tsukuyomi EX or Sigmascape 3 Savage Mode that require you to be away from the party dealing with mechanics and then quickly react to a damage spike, you need to take advantage of your ability to move around while doing something, your ability to mitigate a massive amount of damage before it comes, your ability to react with quick, effective burst healing. Swift Cast can be used to spread an Adloquium when used in tandem with deployment tactics to soak up a massive amount of damage. Indomitability is a huge AoE heal on a short cooldown that heals up damage when the group is in a tight spot. Lustrate and Excogitation can be used to save someone when you just can't stop and cast a physic. Learning to take advantage of your instant, off the global cooldown healing spells will set you apart from the other two healing jobs and make you a more desirable pick. Slide casting is the act of executing a spell and moving immediately before the cast bar finishes. The spell takes effect and you also move a fair distance. If you want to play any sort of casting or healing job, you're gonna need to learn how to do this. Having this skill is absolutely imperative for casting on the move and avoiding AoE attacks. So many fights require strict positioning and burst healing at the same time, and Indomitability won't always be off cooldown. Scholar doesn't necessarily rely on this technique as much as the other two healers due to the sheer amount of instant healing it has access to, but that doesn't mean it's not an important skill to learn. Getting within range to get off your Sukkar or casting a quick Adloquium while running from a mechanic requires proficiency in this technique. Fights like Byakko EX during Orbs or Tsukuyomi during Lunacy are both situations in which you could rely on Indomitability, but slide casting a Sukkar is more efficient because it saves you an Aetherflow stack as well as Indom's cooldown, allowing it to be cast in a more desirable point in the fight. It's also important to identify threats, ones that are imminent as well as unlikely, using your mitigation tools to stop damage before it comes. Where and when is damage occurring? Is it physical, magical, fire, or ice? Knowing this information will help you make a more educated decision about how to heal an encounter. A boss with auto attacks that hit particularly hard, like Halicarnassus, require you to pay special attention to the health of the tanks, using Adloquium or Excogitation to keep them alive. Or a fight like Byakko EX, in which the majority of the damage hits 2 to 4 party members, a white mage could use Cure 3 to more effectively reach these healing targets. Damage types can also be relevant to healers too. Fey Covenant reduces magic damage specifically. Anticipation increases parry rate, which only affects physical damage. The design of the encounter also determines how you should triage your party members. As mentioned several times before, healing operates on a priority system. The tanks are on top, then you, then DPS, etc. However, after determining imminent as well as upcoming threats, you should understand that the immediate requirements for survival are different from this rigid hierarchy. It's important to keep cool and address these problems in the correct order. For example, the boss is about to AoE, and both the off tank and a DPS are low. The enrage will come soon after. In this context, saving the DPS is more vital to the group's success, due to the forthcoming threat of a tight DPS check. Or, in Omega 1 Savage, the boss has just cast Cherubibdis and reduced everybody's HP to 1. The tank busters will come soon after. Obviously, the tank should receive 100% priority over everything else. Or maybe it comes down to either you or the other healer, and you save the other healer because they have more mana and are more likely to be able to restabilize the group. If someone dies during a dungeon or boss encounter, it's because someone somewhere made a mistake. All deaths can be avoided if everyone in the party follows the mechanics and does their job correctly. Raising costs a lot of MP, leaves you wide open for attack, and will probably cost you either a swift cast or sure cast, which could be better used elsewhere. Additionally, anyone revived will receive the weaken debuff, reducing their stats and effectiveness in the party by 10%, and if raised more than once, 30%. Normally, I'm not one for second chances when it comes right out of my mana bar. Before Stormblood, I would have said that an Astrologian or Scholar should be the healer resurrecting dead party members, but of the 3 healers, Astrologian probably has the worst mana economy under high stress or high AoE healing situations, even while having access to both the Ewer and Lucid Dreaming. While White Mage has amazing mana economy, in my opinion, it pales in comparison to Scholars. If there is no Red Mage in the party, you should consider raising as many party members as you can, seeing as how you have access to Aetherflow, Lucid Dreaming, as well as Energy Drain. Sometimes the unexpected can happen. Sometimes your tank doesn't use his cooldowns correctly, and if you plan properly, you can have him back up within seconds. Oftentimes, and even in some of the background footage that's in this video, you'll even see me pop my resurrection macro when I see someone standing in an AoE that I know will kill them. It's kind of a meme, but noticing someone's imminent death can save time. As I mentioned earlier in the guide, Scholar's base class is actually a DPS role, which I believe is a large part of its identity in a raid group. Make no mistake, Scholar is a full-blown healer, but it's built in a way that allows it to act more aggressively than the other 2 healers. The fire and forget nature of its dots, the autonomy of the fairy pet, as well as having the ability to prepare for incoming damage well before the boss even begins casting, provides Scholar with the tools to push out loads of damage without the pressure Astrologians or White Mages would experience. Here's a quick checklist of things you can do to improve your DPS uptime during the fight. Remember to communicate with your tanks. Have a more proactive healing style as opposed to your reactive one. Work with the entire health bar. Don't panic if someone drops to half HP. Remember to use your mitigation tools to reduce damage. Leverage the full extent of your absorbs. Let healing over time do its work. Remember to predict incoming damage. Weave Broil 2 in between healing spells in periods of low single target or slowly ticking AoE damage. Largesse is your friend. Whispering Dawn is your best friend. Know the way your tank's class works. Adjust your sensitivity to incoming damage based on the fight. Remember to have freedom of mobility. Have knowledge of what's coming next. Prioritize your healing targets. And use your Embrace macro. And that reminds me, I still have to cover tanks and how to navigate a healing situation when one member of your party is constantly getting slapped in the face by Shinryu's wings. Dealing with tanks, be they good or bad, is something every healer will have to learn to navigate. As mentioned in several of the earlier sections, the main and off tanks are the most important members of the group besides you, and their safety should be of utmost priority. Obviously, the rest of the raid will be taking damage during this time. The key to maintaining group stability is knowing whether or not the tanks will survive a division of attention long enough for you to attend to the rest of the raid. Paladins, who you'll probably become the most familiar with due to their popularity, are the easiest to keep up with. They have plenty of cooldowns like Sheltron to block hits, Sentinel to reduce incoming damage by 40%, as well as a spot heal in the form of Clemency. Requisite can be used to increase healing potency of your spells by 20%, but I wouldn't count on your tank using this to your benefit. Warrior boasts incredible personal DPS when compared to the other two tanks. Vengeance reduces damage by 30%, Raw Intuition parries all attacks from the front, but can backfire big time if the tank is turned around, resulting in all critical damage, so be prepared in case your tank makes a mistake. Thrill of Battle increases health by 20%, but it doesn't last forever, so keep an eye on their health bar. Dark Knight is easily the squishiest of the three tanks, sporting survival tools in the form of self-healing, utilizing Carve and Spit, Soul Eater, and Abyssal Drain to restore their own health. Blackest Night is a barrier for 20% of their health, and Shadow Wall can be used to reduce magic damage, but Dark Knights have the fewest damage reduction cooldowns of the three tanks. What am I supposed to do with this information, you may ask? I don't play a tank. Well, that's a good question. In order to be the most mana efficient, as well as most prepared for the situations you'll encounter in a fight, you need to be aware of the toolkits your tanks have access to, so you can react accordingly. If my paladin buddy uses Hollowed Ground for a tank buster, it would be foolish of me to pop Excogitation in anticipation of damage. On the other hand, if my Dark Knight buddy uses Living Dead and drops to 1 HP, I'll want to save my Aetherflow stacks to spam Excogitation and Lustrate on the tank before he dies. Knowing what your tank will use on a specific mechanic is an integral part of when you're using your own cooldowns and why. This brings us to the final section, and it'll be quite a long one. This section will cover healing combinations, openers, and advanced techniques. It will thoroughly explore Scholar's healing capabilities, weird or interesting quirks/tips, and anything else I decided to shove into this section at the last second. First topic I'll cover is snapshotting, which will help you take advantage of beneficial buffs like Chain Stratagem, the Balance, or other damage utility. Every dot that's applied is checked every 3 seconds by the server. If the debuff is present during the check, it deals damage. This is a chart that details the way our miasma dot ticks. As you can see, miasma ticks down from 23 seconds all the way down to 2 seconds, where the next tick happens at -1 second. You want to refresh the dot at 1 second remaining, as to not lose uptime on your damage. The rule of thumb is that you'll want to refresh your dots as close to 0 as possible. However, this rule may change depending on the context, and this is where a term called snapshotting comes into play. Snapshotting refers to applying a debuff to the target while under the effects of a positive buff, causing the dot's full duration to act as if the buff were still present. For example, casting Chain Stratagem on the target and subsequently casting Miasma causes all further damage ticks to tick with a 15% increased crit chance, even if Chain Stratagem were to fall off. Now, in a normal context, you'll want to refresh your dots as close to 0 as possible, as I said before, but sometimes the damage increase from snapshotting may warrant clipping your dots in order to take advantage of this phenomenon. Healing ability priority. These lists aren't the end-all be-all, so you should go through the pros and cons of each healing spell before using them and find the most effective option. Mitigation. Fey Covenant is a mitigation skill on a short cooldown and generally doesn't see much use over the course of a fight. That being said, you should turn to this first when it is usable. It doesn't affect any of your resources, and to neglect using it is a waste of value. You'll find later on that Sucker is at the bottom of the priority list for AoE healing, but is still an effective mitigation tool. Use it within moderation when you intend specifically to dampen incoming damage. Sacred Soil requires an Aetherflow stack, which unfortunately is better spent on Lustrate or Indomitability. However, if you know when massive AoE damage is coming towards the party and you have a free Aetherflow stack, go ahead and use Sacred Soil. Completely ignoring 10% of incoming damage is absolutely nothing to scoff at, and you always have the opportunity to receive a free Sucker, which is a free 1,800 mana. Don't spend all your stacks on energy drain, when you could be using Soil to enable your other healers to contribute to DPS too. The Adloquium/Deployment Tactics combination requires a few seconds of setup, so it's not the most amazing form of damage absorption when you're in a fight that you're unfamiliar with. If you know of a mechanic that you'd like to use it for, and you know which set intervals said mechanic occurs in, absolutely plan out and use Deployment Tactics. This ability is best used to dampen the damage from a specific mechanic you know you'll struggle healing up. Otherwise, it can be difficult to deal with when you don't know the fight. Eye for an Eye is definitely more useful during 4-man dungeons, but that doesn't mean it can't find some use in higher level group content like Extreme Primals and Savage Raids. Just keep in mind that it's RNG based mitigation, so damage reduction is not always guaranteed. If you're gonna use it, it's probably best to pair it with Deployment Tactics. Embrace is the most mana efficient healing spell in the game. It's absolutely free and comes at no cost to the Scholar. Fall back on Eos or Selene if you can for single target healing, but don't turn your brain off and forget to use healing spells altogether. You should be able to gauge incoming damage and very quickly determine whether or not it's something your fairy can handle by herself. Adloquium is a sizable barrier with a high cost of 1,440 mana that puts damage at a standstill. Use it often but wisely, leverage the entire absorb, and rely on it to prevent large damage spikes to free up GCDs that can be spent on DPS uptime. Excogitation is basically a glorified Lustrate with an added 200 potency. The spell is intended to be something you can use when you anticipate massive single target damage, but it's also an insanely effective clutch heal. Use this for telegraph tank busters like Tsukuyomi's Torment the Weak, or party members at dangerously low HP levels that need to be healed exactly immediately right this second. It's incredibly powerful because it has the ability to actively subtract from incoming damage, as opposed to healing it, theoretically making it better than Lustrate. Lustrate is an instant 600 potency heal with no cooldown and no animation lag. Lustrate is really good, don't get me wrong, but don't accidentally spin your Aetherflow stacks all in one place. It's easy to spam. The goal is to minimize Lustrate casts in favor of spinning your stacks on Indom and Energy Drain, which requires good mitigation to accomplish. Adloquium plus Emergency Tactics is a heal for about 600 potency, and is nearly identical to Lustrate, but with an added mana cost of 1,440. If you have extra mana to spare, and you feel like saving your last Aetherflow stack for another ability, go ahead and use this combo. But other than that, and I guess using it when you have no more Aetherflow stacks and need a heal right now, you won't have to use Emergency Tactics for single target heals all that often. Physic. If someone is dying and you have no Aetherflow or Fairy Gauge, spamming Physic is probably not going to save them. Physic is to be used for topping people off, or for healing targets at lower health totals as to make your AoE healing more optimal. Damage should be mitigated or cleverly restored in an efficient and effective manner. Physic doesn't fit into really either of those two categories. That's not to say Physic shouldn't be used at all, but its usefulness is relatively limited. AoE healing. Emergency Tactics plus Sucker. ET and Sucker heal for just about 200 potency less than Indom, but it should be your go-to option for AoE healing when Indom is on cooldown, or you're saving it for another damage spike later on. It can be used strictly for healing or for topping everyone off, but honestly that job should either be saved for Whispering Dawn or regular old Sucker. I placed this ability, or this combo I should say, above Indom only because Scholar can have a lot of excess mana if you play the class correctly and pre-plan to heal damage in advance instead of reactively. Using this combo will actually help save your other healer's mana. For fights like Omega 3 Savage, this combo can also be a godsend when you know when AoE is coming and people still aren't topped off. Indomitability should be your next go-to AoE healing spell. It's free, it's instant, it's amazing, and it heals a lot. Use it, but don't rely on it. It does have a cooldown, and you should be prepared when damage comes and this ability isn't available for whatever reason. Many scholars I see overuse and over-rely on Indomitability. Don't get me wrong, Indom is hands down the most important and most powerful ability Scholar has access to. But the notion that it should always be used over Sucker or emergency tactics is just plain wrong. Overuse results in overheal, and many people I see run around like a chicken with its head cut off when damage happens and Indom is on cooldown. You need to learn when using this ability is appropriate instead of randomly firing it off at the hint of a raid-wide attack. As mentioned earlier, Whispering Dawn is great for topping off the raid after spike damage or periodic damage over time, like during Classical Element in Omega 1 Savage or Susanoo during Phase 2. However, Whispering Dawn combined with Rouse or Fey Illumination can pull almost as much healing as Indomitability over a period of time. Sucker is generally pretty mana inefficient, but because of the access we have to both Aetherflow and Lucid Dreaming, its cost is no longer really an issue. Sucker is placed below all other options because while the barrier is nice, the healing potency is relatively low. The spell's intended purpose is for damage mitigation or topping people off, not healing damage, so use this accordingly. In fact, a Sucker with both Fey Illumination and Largesse up is almost as strong as Indomitability. That's 495 potency versus 500. Again, these priority lists are not the end-all be-all. Even looking at my own footage, you'll find that depending on the context, I mix and match these abilities to meet the current and future needs of the party, and that's what healing is all about. Deployment and emergency tactics are unique abilities to a Scholar, and should be treated as such. Find innovative ways to make use of them in different fights. Intelligent or well thought out plays will help you grow familiar with the quirks of a Scholar as a healer, and they'll earn your respect if someone notices what you're doing. You can pop emergency tactics as the boss begins casting to start the cooldown a few seconds faster, or you could largesse and deploy a swift casted Adloquium for a quick damage soak while on the move. You also might have noticed that Eos is immune to most boss mechanics, which makes her a prime target for deploying and absorb. These abilities only serve as tools to make healing less difficult. Don't forget, Scholars have several abilities that can be used to increase or modify the strength of our absorbs in order to mitigate the most amount of damage possible. Use these to your advantage. To remind you all, Largesse, Fey Illumination, and Dissipation can all be used to beef up your absorbs. These are the important modifiers that you should line up with specific mechanics in order to mitigate as much damage as possible and maximize DPS uptime for both you and the other healer. Now onto an interesting phenomenon that I noticed while I was playing Scholar, something I call Absorb Delay. Now if you haven't noticed, shields in FF14 work a bit differently from base heals. Comparing Medica and Sucker, they both restore target health instantly, but the galvanized buff appears roughly 1.5 seconds later, and you can take advantage of this delay. Casting Sucker on a full health party just for the absorb results in overheal, obviously, which is a bad thing. However, when you take advantage of this slight absorb delay, you can heal the party with your Sucker or deployment tactics, while the galvanize effect appears immediately after the attack, preparing your allies for the next AoE. This is a difficult technique and it has some pretty strict timing, but taking advantage of this phenomenon may save you time, mana, overheal, and increase DPS uptime in the long run. I would recommend learning and perfecting the timing early on, so it'll come easy during high-end raiding and other pieces of difficult content. You have two choices: casting and absorb 2 seconds before an attack to soak damage, or utilizing this absorb delay to heal the party while the shields apply 2 seconds later, preparing you for the next AoE. Adloquium can also be used to capitalize on this innate delay with the absorb mechanic. For example, it's possible to apply Adloquium to the tank as he's taking auto attack damage, and spread it with deployment tactics, shield intact. Obviously, the timing on this play is somewhat strict, but it's doable for a healer with any sort of experience on Scholar. Absorb delay can be a good thing or a bad thing, a trick you can take advantage of, or crippling debilitation. It's entirely possible to cast Succor too late and not actually mitigate the damage you wanted to. This delay also makes casting Adloquium back-to-back impossible, because the first shield registers right as the second one goes off, rendering the second shield ineffective. This is precisely the reason why as a Scholar you're called to be a proactive healer. Preparing for damage beforehand means that this absorb delay is little more than a minor annoyance in some situations, and a vehicle for more effective mitigation in others. Continuing our analysis of absorbs, I'd like to answer a question some newer healers may be wondering. When is it appropriate to cast an absorb over a heal? Theoretically, absorbs are always better than heals because A, you can apply absorbs even if everyone is topped off, even though you really shouldn't be doing this period, and B, absorbs actively subtract from incoming damage. However, this observation does not take into account the strength of the individual absorb spells that Scholar has access to. As of Stormblood, Adloquium and Succor don't provide nearly enough absorption to warrant using them over a Lustrate or Excogitation. There's always that possibility that the barrier just isn't enough. To put it simply, if your healing target is already low and you anticipate more damage is coming, it would probably be better to cast a Lustrate or Excog and just hope this person survives. It's too soon to order your fairy to do something, and even with Swiftcast, the absorb from Adloquium may not be quick enough due to absorb delay, or large enough to soak the damage in time. Lustrate is of higher potency, has 0 animation lag, and can be cast 2 or even 3 times if need be. But in order to make a more educated decision, you'd have to consider the current needs of the party, healing priority, your own resources, and upcoming danger. The rule of thumb is that absorb should be used preemptively, meaning that you should be preparing for something as opposed to reacting to it. If you're putting up shields seconds before the damage hits, you're already too late. But again, in some instances, Succor or Adloquium may be warranted. It's all about context. I found this DPS opener on the internet courtesy of FFXIV Momo, so thanks for that. I've tried it, it works, big deeps, moving on. A Scholar doesn't need a lot of AoE burst healing often, but when they do, I see a lot of healers just panic and spam Succor, draining their mana dry and putting extra stress on their partner. These are just a few combinations of abilities that you can use to put out massive amounts of healing for damage spike phases, like in say Omega 3 Savage during Dimensional Wave spam, or Tsukuyomi EX during Lunacy. Just note that some of these combinations are truly massive amounts of HPS, and if you have a competent healing partner whatsoever, you won't need to use these plays. Now solo healing on the other hand is a different story. Rouse plus Phaelum plus Whispering Dawn. This is your bread and butter AoE heal over time combo, and it'll solve all of your Medikitsu knockoff needs. But in all seriousness, always pair Rouse with Whispering Dawn. Always. It's a free 40% additional healing over time for absolutely free. Did I mention it's free? Fey Illumination isn't always necessary, and it may even be better to save it for a different mechanic you know you'll need it for. But you'll probably be using some variation of this combination in a normal raiding context. Succor / Indomitability / Emergency Tactics. I call this combo the big 3 because these are your 3 main AoE healing spells. Succor is used first in case there's a barrage of AoE damage, in which case it'll help mitigate damage on the second hit, as you're in the process of casting emergency tactics. If there is no AoE barrage, however, tack Sucker on the end and open with emergency tactics first. Indomitability should always be cast in the middle because it provides the bulk of your healing, and depending on how much damage has gone out, Indomitability might not be warranted. I use this combo often in Savage and solo healing. Phaelume and Dissipation. Fey Illumination and Dissipation are generally not a combo people think of because they underuse and underestimate the power of Dissipation, even in a situation where its use might be warranted. However, you're receiving 2 healing potency increases, adding up to 30% additional healing, as well as the additional Aetherflow stacks. You can combine this combination with Largesse for a whopping 60% added potency on your healing spells. This is the only mitigation combo on this list, and it certainly gets the job done. This is Largesse plus Adloquium / Deployment Tactics plus Sacred Soil plus Fey Cup. The Largesse increases the potency of your deployment tactics by a huge 30%. 10% of the incoming damage is outright reduced from the total because of the Sacred Soil, and Fey Covenant reduces 20% more damage if it's magic based. You can clean up with an additional Sucker after the fact, preparing for another damage spike, or your partner can top everybody off with a heal over time. Emergency Tactics Sucker plus Rouse plus Whispering Dawn. This combination is relatively low healing at first, but increases over time as Whispering Dawn tops everybody off. The first AoE heal is really just intended to get everybody to a reasonable amount of HP until the Whispering Dawn kicks in. Throw a Sucker in there if you see another AoE attack incoming before the healing over time finishes ticking. Excogitation plus Adloquium plus Swiftcast plus Adloquium Emergency Tactics. This is the only single target healing combo I have on this list, and boy is it effective. Imagine the tank is about to be hit with a tank buster and your other healer is either out of mana or out of commission. Excogitation provides 800 potency in healing, combined with the absorb effect of Adloquium, and finally a single target emergency tactics to top off any missing health. In between your global cooldowns, Eos or Selene can assist with either Embrace or Fairy Tether. Sucker plus Indomitability plus Emergency Tactics Sucker plus Whispering Dawn Fey Illumination combo. Whatever content you're doing that forces you to heal this much, I applaud you. This is a lot of healing, especially if you decide to combine it with Largesse or even the Fey Illumination Dissipation combo. The Fey Illumination buffs the Sucker, which regulates how much damage is coming in as you clean up with Indomitability, Emergency Tactics, or even both. Fey Union is a really undervalued and underused healing spell. Think of it as a 480 potency toggleable region that has no effect on your cooldowns. Since you can have up to 10 ticks, it's 4,800 potency over 30 seconds. It's a really amazing ability. I love to use this during tank busters with an Adloquium for health buffer, or moving around during Selenomancy in, let's say, Tsukuyomi EX and somebody needs healing, or during Omega 3 Savage immediately after the book phase when both tanks are vulnerable to being killed by an auto attack, or it could be used to counteract the heavy bleed dot during 07S. It has some really amazing uses, but sometimes it's difficult to find an appropriate time. Finding and abusing opportunities to use this ability generates tons of value, and it's a mark of an experienced, creative, and capable scholar. The meta. What a big, bad, scary world that us casuals just don't understand. I and many others typically think of the meta as a terrible thing, becoming a negative influence for newer healers who are sucked in a trap of DPS obsession and elitism. But despite this negative connotation, the meta can teach us all something. The meta holds a sort of hyper-efficient, minimalistic perspective on healing that requires high skill, quick reflexes, inside-out familiarity with the fight, and precise calculations on both healers' parts. The mentality of this ideal is simple: minimalize GCD spent on healing in favor of DPS. This is the apex of skill. Healers at this level know exactly what they're doing. calculating and anticipating damage before it comes, pre-preparing responses to this damage, and taking advantage of the fact that encounters in FF14 are scripted. There is no main/off healer. If you know what's coming next, you don't need to make snap decisions or calculations. You don't need to worry about mana efficiency or overhealing. You simply know what's happening when, and optimize the way you play because of it. You too can improve your healing style by emulating these high-level players. By creating a sort of mental timeline of events in a fight and matching cooldown spells or plays to each mechanic, you can optimize your healing and exponentially increase DPS uptime. Scholars specifically will want to place things like Indomitability, Deployment Tactics, Whispering Dawn, and the other fairy abilities, or Dissipation on this mental timeline. This is the mentality of an excellent, well-versed, not only experienced healer, but a skilled one. That sort of segues us into our next topic of conversation, FF logs and parsing. Now you probably already know that the most serious raiders that do high-level content are parsing, and examining this data can help you get a good idea of what your own performance should look like or emulate. FF logs is all about improvement. As you can see in these screenshots, these are my logs of Susanoo and Lakshmi a run when they first came out. I improved massively from analyzing my own logs, comparing them to others, and adjusting my own healing style. I'm going to give you all a peek of my own logs for a Tsukuyomi solo heal group that I did a while back, which actually has its footage featured earlier in this video. My logs aren't perfect, but they're not bad either. As you can see, in terms of HPS for solo healing, I'm parsing pretty high. Again, I'm not perfect, and this log is actually my first time solo healing Tsukuyomi, but I know the information here is still applicable. Using my own logs as an example, you'll notice that my main heal is Galvanize, the absorption buff. If there's something that I've really tried to emphasize throughout this guide, it's that preparing for and absorbing damage preemptively is really where the strength of Scholar lies, and you can see that exemplified in my own playstyle. Galvanize is easily one of Scholar's best assets. The class just wouldn't function without the absorb effect of Sukkar, Adloquium, and Deployment Tactics. Reacting to damage is really just going to gimp you as a Scholar. You don't have the same sort of on-demand healing throughput that Astrologian and White Mage have access to, because you trade that reliability of those types of spells for the absorption advantage. Scholar easily has the highest skill ceiling because of this, but if you aren't making use of the tools that you're given, you're gimping yourself. Scholar is not a class for everyone. I'm sorry to say, but it's not. It requires a lot more management, a lot more forethought, a lot more insight than the other two healers. But making use of the interesting and unique tools that Scholar has access to can be a really rewarding and satisfying experience. Overall, Scholar is an amazing class with a proactive healing style and high skill ceiling. It brings forward lots of healing utility in the form of the Fairy, along with free and efficient burst healing options in the form of Aetherflow abilities. The job can be played defensively, healing damage quickly and effectively, preparing for the next damage spike, and alleviating the pressure from the other healer, or it can be played offensively, using absorbs, the Fairy, and damage mitigation tools to maximize DPS uptime. Okay everyone, that concludes everything that will be covered in this guide. I hope it was insightful, improved your skills, and inspired you to pick up Scholar. I appreciate that you took the time to watch my video, so please like and subscribe and comment down below if you want to see more content like this. I'd like to give a quick shout out to two people before I wrap it up. First, Baka Games, whose healing commentary I found to be extremely helpful and informative and inspired me to explore the intricacies involved with being a healer. And then Jade, my best friend. She's just as skilled with me, and I probably forced her to read through all 27 pages of this script to make sure it made sense. Love you, Jade, and I'll see you all later. Peace out.